For more information, please visit restoreportsmouth.com.
Hey church, good evening. Welcome to Proverbs on the Patio. We're going to be in chapter 22 tonight, and one of the most full chapters of incredible Proverbs. I only pulled out a handful tonight. There's actually going to be a huge transition. Most of you know by now that Proverbs on the Patio is a chapter by chapter study through the book of Proverbs. We are 22 weeks in, and every week I try to pull out 1, 2, 3, sometimes 6 or 7 verses that really stand out to me one at a time. And to this point, most of the Proverbs have been segmented, just random thoughts. But in the middle of this chapter, the writer is going to begin writing very specific thoughts to his son, and he's going to line up about 30 significant thoughts. And some of them are going to they're going to go over a few verses long. And so we'll get into a few of those. But verse 1, I want to jump into first, is a very, very popular proverb, and one that most of us understand. A good name is rather to be chosen than great riches, and loving favor rather than silver and gold. We live in an age where everybody wants to be known, everybody wants to be famous, everybody wants to be popular, or just in some way we want to get our name out there. More than ever, people are all about building a brand, building their name, building their reputation. But in this case, the emphasis is not just having a name, but having a good name. Being known for something good, being known for doing what's right, is rather to be chosen than great riches, loving favor, silver, and loving favor rather than silver or gold. So you already know this. We learned this as kids. When we are growing up, it's more important what we're known as, what we're known for, than what we have, than maybe even being known, but being known for doing something good. Now the next verse is a little bit different, and it really points to the gospel goodness of the New Testament. The rich and the poor meet together. The Lord is the maker of them all. He says, hey, we're all the same. We're all created in God's image. And this is really indicating what's going to happen in the New Testament, where Jesus says there's neither rich nor poor, there's neither Greek. Paul writes it, but Jesus proclaims it. And as a matter of fact, Jesus spends more of his ministry with the poor than the wealthy, which to that point, most deities, most religious people, man, they were all about wealth. And Jesus turns that on its head and says, listen, it doesn't make you more special or less special based on your wealth or income. And so it's encouraging for us to know to this day, as letters are written to the churches by Paul, hey, don't go out of your way to make room for somebody just because they have some prestige or some wealth. Don't dismiss someone because they're poor. They meet together here. And here's the issue. It's this convergence of poor, rich. We all have life. We all have to make decisions. Eternity is based on what we do in this life, whether or not we had money or wealth. Then in verse 6, I'm going to remind you that what I'm about to read is a proverb. And it's a good proverb, and it doesn't just apply to spiritual matters, but it also applies to most matters. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. If you teach your kid how to be honest when they're young, they probably will return to it. Now, most kids will depart from it. Look, whether they're a teenager or in their 20s, everybody goes out and they make decisions. Sometimes they break their parents' heart. And this is certainly true for the way. And understand here, the way here means the spiritual way, the truth of God's word, the truth of loving the Lord. And so we know too many parents who are praying and seeking God for their kids who have turned away from the Lord. This is not a promise, this is a proverb, and more often than not, when we raise our kids right, they will return unto it. This is also true of not just parenting skills as it relates to spiritual matters, but in most matters of life. If you teach kids when they're young, more often than not, that knowledge will stay with them. I saw a popular video last week. Most of you probably saw it. There's a ballerina. She's in her 90s and she was dealing with dementia and Alzheimer's, but they turned on some music that she danced to 45 years ago, and suddenly her arms start mimicking the movements of the dance. Why? Because it's in there, man. It's something that she trained over and over and over, and she heard over and over and over, and she had danced to it so often. It's that muscle memory. And so when we have children, the indication is we should put in their muscle memory, look, we should honor the Lord. This is what it looks like. So when we train up a child, it's repetitive, it's over and over. Why? So that when they get older, they will not depart from it. Instead, they'll return to it. So that is a proverb in Proverbs chapter 22 and verse 6. It doesn't always happen, but more often than not, it does happen. And then in verse 10, cast out the scorner and contention shall go, yea, strife and reproach shall cease. Sometimes the Bible says it's good just to dismiss somebody who is there to make waves, to create problems, to argue for no reason at all. Look, I do my best to listen to people. We do our best to meet people where they are and to care for people. But sometimes someone just wants to cause trouble, right? They just want to fight. They just want to stir up issues. And it says here, cast them out and watch, contention will go. Yea, strife and reproach shall cease. So in some Proverbs it says, hey, deal with the scorner. In others it says, dismiss the scorner. The idea is you should have the wisdom to know when it's wise to listen, when it's wise to answer, when it's wise not to answer, and in this case, when it's wise to cast them out and just say, hey, we're not going to deal with you anymore. You have done nothing but divide this house, but divide this body, divide this workplace environment, whatever it is. Verse 13. This is a little bit humorous in how he writes it. The slothful man says, there is a lion without, I shall be slain in the streets. He says, look, when somebody's determined not to do work, they're going to come up with the most out of touch, ridiculous reasons not to go to work. And in this case, the guy says, man, I can't go to work. There might be a lion in the street that would attack me. And as humorous as that sounds to us, we all have been there, right? Where we just don't want to do something, so we'll come up with some lame excuse, and we're texting our boss, we're calling somebody, we're letting them know, and we know as soon as we say it, it's ridiculous. That's not what's going on. We're not sick. That's not going to happen. But when you're determined to be slothful, that's where your mind goes. Verse 24, make no friendship with an angry man, and with a furious man thou shalt not go. Now that at this point, the writer of Proverbs has made clear you shouldn't be angry. Try not to be an angry, mean-spirited man. But in this case, he goes a step further and he says, make no friendship with an angry man. Why? And with a furious man thou shalt not go. Maya, be quiet. He says instead, why? Verse 25, this is one of those, we've turned a corner now. Around verse 20, he begins to indicate to him that he is writing him a lot of truths in a row, and this is one of those truths, and it covers 2 verses. He says, why not make friends with angry men? Verse 25, lest you learn his ways and get a snare to your soul. This is an indication that when somebody is angry, mean-spirited, hate-filled, it actually spreads to the people around them. This is why when you find a workplace environment that is angry, everybody's at each other's throats, you're often going to discover that somebody at the top is angry and always going after people. These things tend to spread. When there's a toxic culture, there's usually, it started somewhere, it started with someone. So he says here, don't make a friendship with it. Now look, we don't just not talk to them and avoid them, but we don't spend a lot of time with people who are angry or with a furious man, somebody who's always getting in fights. Look, you're going to get dragged into those skirmishes and those troubles that he gets into. So to this point, don't be angry. Now to the next point, hey, make sure you're being careful who you hang out with, because this will influence and affect your life. And then the last one I want to pull out is verse 28. Remove not the ancient landmark which your fathers have set. A couple of things here. Back then, their land was like our land, like there were limits, there were boundaries, and now today we have like fences. But back then, their land covered acres and acres, and sometimes the boundaries would go for up to miles long. And so what they would do is they would set up piles of rocks, and these were the boundary markers. And what somebody might do if they weren't super honest, if they weren't honest at all, they would go out and they'd move those. One night they'd move them maybe 10 feet, the next night maybe 100 feet. Over the course of a year or two, you could get extra acreage, you could get extra land, you could increase your wealth, you could increase the size of your fields, which increase your income. Just imagine if you could log into your bank account and just add a little bit of room here, create money, like create room where somebody else deposits and it goes into your account. If you kept doing that, you could have more and more wealth. So he says, don't do that. Now there's a couple indications. To this point, we understand that the fields were not just for the wealthy. They always cut the corners at a slope so that there would be extras for the widows, for the poor, who would come and they would reap that harvest and be able to provide for themselves. But also the point here is to learn to live within your boundaries, the boundaries that you've been given. So look, as we get older, we realize there are some boundaries that have been placed on us physically, right? Look, as much as we want to be somebody else or something else, this is who we are. We have certain gifts, we have certain abilities, we have certain talents, and certain things we can't do. Some of us would love to be musical, but man, we just can't keep a beat. Some of us would love to be more outgoing or whatever it is, and certainly we can grow in these areas, but learning to live within your boundaries is the underlying theme here. Number one, don't be dishonest. Number two, learn to appreciate what you have and live within those boundaries. And certainly that's a New Testament principle that Paul talks about often in the area of finances, as well as the area of spiritual gifts. As much as we might want to have the gifts of somebody else, learn to appreciate the gifts that you have. And here's the real indication. The writer of Proverbs is saying, listen, what's in your field is yours, but it's also a blessing to those around you. So learn to live within your means so that your in this case field, could be a greater blessing to those, in that case, widows and poor who came and harvested the corners of those fields. So, a lot of different proverbs today, talking about raising up a child in the way that he will not depart from it, talking about keeping the corners of the fields. All these different things apply today. We still have to raise children. We still have to learn to live within our means. These proverbs are good for us. They're good indications of where we are. Over 2,000 years later, these principles still apply. So I hope you've had a great night. I hope you've been encouraged by this proverb. Next week we'll be in chapter 23. I look forward to that. Appreciate you guys watching, and we've got some links in the description for you if you'd like to find out more about church or how to get involved. Otherwise, I'll see you at 9:30 on Sunday under our outdoor event tent, or I'll see you at 8, 9:30, or 11 online this weekend. Have a great rest of your night.